I'm Joel Jamieson. I'm from DiUS, and today I'm just going to share what I learned running my first remote product discovery recently. So just in case you're not sure who we are, at DiUS, we like to use emerging tech to help our companies help their customers. Can be more behind the scenes, technical stuff, cloud infrastructure, or it can be more building out new digital products and new interactions, things like chatbots, that sort of thing. We like to work lean and agile, and this discovery that we ran was sort of using those sort of principles. Me personally, I've been at DiUS about 7 years now, been in the industry about 15 years. Started off as a dev, moved through to a delivery lead, which we are now. So delivery leads are the people responsible for making sure you get the best outcomes for like delivering something, I guess, and making sure you're building things, the right things in the right way. Now, in terms of experience, I've been anywhere from more startup type projects through to the bigger enterprise stuff. And for discoveries, anywhere between maybe a couple hour simple discovery through to the more complex sort of 4 weeks type discoveries. Remotely, my experience is fairly limited prior to this, and I think what I would have considered remote facilitation was sort of dialing someone in from a room, and then that would be my remote facilitation. So I'm going to share a few of the tips that I learned when I was running my first product discovery, and hopefully you get something out of it. If you have any questions, go here to dius.tech/Slack, and at the end of the session, we'll go through that again. I'll answer any of your questions. So for me, discoveries can be tricky at the best of times, even when you take out this remote angle. You're often working with new people that maybe haven't done discoveries before, different personality types, trying to build new products when you're not really sure which direction they need to go. It's all very dynamic. It needs to be collaborative. And you're often having workshops where they build the insights from one session into the next session to hit outcomes that you're not actually going to see for a couple of weeks. So it does create a lot of pressure. And compared to like a normal meeting where you maybe worst case you're losing an hour or two, if your discovery isn't right, you're potentially wasting a couple of weeks worth of everyone's time, or even worse, you might actually start building the product that is sort of set up for failure, I guess you'd say. So when COVID came along, this was a good chance for me to get more into the remote space and just see how we could run these discoveries remotely. Other people at DiUS had been doing this for some time, so it wasn't new to a lot of people, but for me, I hadn't actually taken the jump yet, and so this was a good chance to sort of have a look, see how it goes. Now, I was curious what would need to change remotely. In my head, I just had the internet falling over or just not being able to communicate, that sort of as people are talking, and I had no idea what sort of tools we could use. So this was all about trying to understand exactly what was available to us. So when we were approached by the Black Dog Institute, they're a mental health organisation within Australia, to help them out with the discovery. This was going to be my first chance to run a remote discovery. Now, in this case, the topic was a bit more sensitive than most because we were going to be dealing with an app that was going to help prevent suicidal thinking, which made me sort of think that maybe we needed to change the approach, because we would actually be working with people that had lived experience with suicidal thinking, and this had to be part of our consideration when we were planning the discovery. But with discoveries, for me, I think there's a few key principles that always have to apply. So you need clear objectives. There's no point running out the same workshops every time because it might not be the same sort of outcome. So are you trying to get concepts? Are you trying to understand the problem space? Are you actually trying to get to a solution? So you need to be clear on what exactly your objectives are and tailor those workshops to meet those. It's important to have empowered people throughout on the journey. No point having the decision makers come in at the start or at the end and kick things around or make decisions then, because it's too late. You need your team to be working with the different mindsets throughout. So you have your technical, you have your user experience, you have your business viability lens, all working collaboratively along with the subject matter experts to get the best outcomes. And for me, it works best if you have almost like a narrative throughout. So you have your workshop 1 that feeds into workshop 2, and it just creates that sort of story as you're working through it. But most importantly, it has to be collaborative and the people have to be engaged, otherwise your discovery won't work. So first, we needed some tools. So first port of call was checking around with the other people at DiUS who would actually run some, get some tips off them about what they're using. It seemed to be a choice of 2 between Mural or Miro, and the consensus was I could use either, both seemed to work. For us, we ended up going with Mural, and that was mostly around because the ease of navigation for first-time users. It's a bit easier because you have your navigation a bit clearer. With Miro, people can get a bit lost on the big board. Other considerations around external access and sort of licensing. So maybe you need people to be able to edit from the project team, but then also the read-only people to come in and sort of look at the end of the day. So that's another consideration with these sort of tools. So for video conferencing, I'm sure it's not new to anyone. You've probably had a couple of months worth of playing around with the tools. Most important thing is around making sure it's a smooth, seamless experience so people can communicate well. Audio, video problems, they're what you want to avoid. Breakout rooms, if you're going to be running activities where you want to break out into smaller groups, there are tools to make that a bit easier, like Zoom. For us, we ended up just creating multiple rooms within Google Hangouts and then manually moving people between the rooms, which is a bit clunky and people get a bit confused. So it's worth considering. But also, can you record from your tools? Because it's good to be able to sort of go back and check out what actually came out in the session to really look at sort of stuff. But overall, no single tool is going to work for everything. And so don't try and find a magic tool. So what did we do to get prepared? So first step was learning the tools. So not only the basics, being able to put post-its and lay out things on the board, but also from a facilitator point of view, what tools could we use to make sure people got the most out of the tool? So things like getting them to the right spot, getting them to navigate around the board. Then it was building out the board. So I'll go through in the next slide exactly what that means. One of the questions I had coming into this was, will the usual activities work? So in our case, it was a 2-week discovery. The first week was where we were going to do the bulk of the sessions. And we kicked off with some lightning talks, moving through to some understanding the problem space, understanding our users, so user segment mapping, personas, user journey mapping, into value proposition canvas and story mapping with some assumptions mapping, as well as understanding the tech space. So there was a range of activities, and I wasn't sure exactly whether they could all be applied in the same way for us, but we didn't see any red flags to indicate that definitely wouldn't be able to work. So we went ahead with that plan. One of the benefits, obviously remotely, is no rooms needed. I don't know if anyone else has been in the big organizations where you need to book a month in advance to get any sort of sizable room. So that was a pleasant surprise. One thing we probably didn't do too well was actually get people to use the tools beforehand. We shared links and got them to come to the board, but we found that when people were coming in, they didn't really know how to navigate around. And so it might be worth having one-on-ones before a discovery if you can. In our case, it didn't really make sense because the first workshop was going to have about 20 people as a kickoff, and most workshops around 10 to 12 people. So probably would have been too difficult, but something worth considering if you've got a small team. And we also had dry run, which was pretty effective. We actually found a few problems in the way we were thinking about running the workshop. So we tested some brainstorming of post-its, voting on the post-its through to the next activity. We highlighted a few gaps in terms of our knowledge of how things work. So it's well worth trying out a dry run. Another important thing though is just making sure you have a decent internet connection, because it can be quite frustrating for people if the audio is coming in and out. For me, prior to this, I actually upgraded to NBN, but I'm not sure if it was actually better or worse. So are your boards ready? So first thing you need is just to make sure there's enough space on your board. So just like a physical wall, people need room to be able to do what they need to do. So that could be post-its or drawings, whatever you need to do. It's good to have a logical flow to it. So for a workshop, we had a flow from top to bottom. So people didn't need you to constantly be explaining exactly where you needed them. They could figure it out, because start at the top and work down. We also started a big board where it had all our workshops working left to right too, so people could get that narrative going across. Didn't work out ideal, because we noticed on the first session that it was a bit laggy in terms of performance, because maybe there was too much stuff on this board. So we ended up having to break it up. But either way, it was consideration, have that logical flow. Also, you notice in this example on the right, we have a clear purpose and instructions up the top. Now, this is important so people can work through independently. One of the other benefits too was we would have really good examples as people were working through. So in this case, for a story mapping, we kind of had a few images about what exactly a good MVP looks like, as well as some worked through story mapping examples, just to get in the right mindset of what each component is. It's good to set up a navigation too. So this is an example of what a side panel looks like in Mural, where you can have quick links through to either activities or within the activity. But it is important to lock things down. We started a few of our sessions without locking all the background elements down, and it meant that as people were navigating in and moving their post-its, all these boxes were going across the screen as people were moving our titles and everything. So definitely worth locking things down and making sure you have the right permissions set up for the board for people to be able to come in if the right people come in. So then it was time to get started. So I guess for the Black Dog guys, this was going to be their first really agile, lean product discovery. So it was going to be a bit challenging on their side. For us, or for me personally, it was my first remote discovery. So there was challenges there. So this is kind of how we felt, like we were all strapped into the rocket, not sure exactly where it was going to go, but we're pretty confident, I guess, reasonably confident we were going to get some good outcomes. So first thing we started with was just some different ground rules. Where in a normal discovery, you might have ground rules around parking lots just to speed up conversations. We had additional ones that catered to remote working. So things like making sure your video was on. This was important from a facilitation point of view, so you can see what people are thinking a little bit. It also helps build rapport between people, put a face to the name. And then also with audio, we're actually encouraging people to have their audio always on. Now, obviously, if there was some background noise, they could turn it off, but we thought it was important to get a bit more natural conversation, because it is a bit of an inhibitor. If you have that mute button, people sort of need to click it before they actually sort of talk. We used slightly different warm-up activities than we would normally, so we effectively used it as a test of the tool. So we had people search the internet for an image that best describes them, and then they had to bring it back to the board and paste it, and then sort of introduce themselves talking to that image. Now, so this is just a way to sort of test out the tool more than anything and get people comfortable with it. And we actually sort of found some problems off the back of this, like the performance that I mentioned before. So it is worth keeping it simple for that first session. In our case, we had the warm-up moving into some lightning talk, so that was a good way to do it, because it let us test the tool without being fully committed in that first session. One thing we did notice, though, it is hard to build that rapport. You're not going to have those coffee catch-ups or the casual bump into around the water cooler. Every interaction is through the video conferencing, so you really have to kind of work harder at it and sort of force conversation a little bit. But it is important to get there early, just set things up. Just make sure your computer's working before the session starts. I know there was a few times when my computer started to update itself, so yeah, worth keeping in mind. So running the workshop. So it is important remotely to be really clear about what you're trying to get out of the meeting. So you want a strong purpose, clear agendas, and your time management needs to be a bit better than normal. It's important to have your links accessible because as people come in, they might not know where the boards are, so have them readily available to them. Working remotely, one thing that we did notice, we're getting a bit more tired than normal. So it's important to have shorter sessions than what you would do in a proper discovery. In a physical discovery, in the past I've sort of run 4-hour or 8-hour type days, but with breaks in the middle. But here they say the maximum really is sort of about 2 hours per session, and even then you want to have a break sort of every hour just to keep people fresh, because it does become draining. A few of our activities actually sort of took up about 2.5 hours, so we actually figured out by the end that we were about half hour over for pretty much all of our 2-hour kind of blocks. And we put this down just sort of the learning curve on the tools, as well as things just taking slightly longer than what you'd expect normally. So just factor that in. Definitely worth using breakout groups though too. Yeah, we had big groups, so we had about 10 to 12 people working through in our workshops, and not everyone was contributing, so it is good to break it up into the smaller groups. We had a few problems managing people, moving them between the various video conferencing rooms, because we were still part of the big board, but then you're on your separate board and people weren't muting themselves on the big board, and so you're getting this audio going through everything. So there's probably easier ways to do it, but just with a bit of planning, it could have been a bit smoother for us. And other things you can use, like timers and visual cues, to create that emphasis to get people really focused. So there's timers and things like that you can use. So facilitating the cloud, what did that mean? I wasn't too sure prior to this, but effectively what it meant was I was spending a lot of time watching people's faces. So telltale signs, if you see people coming in close, having a look around the screen, that that's a red flag that maybe they're sort of lost. Otherwise, the confusion, also looking for maybe they can't quite find what they need. They're kind of things to look out for. From a cursor point of view, I was actually sort of watching the cursors move around. Now at the start, there's a lot of movement. Everyone's sort of getting in there doing post-its. As people are getting finished, maybe just a couple cursors moving around. The other thing too, and I guess that's a sign that maybe the activity is wrapping up. The other thing too is to make sure that everyone is accounted for in those cursors, because we had a few times where people weren't there and we actually sort of found they were on a different part of the board and maybe not working in the right spot, so we had to bring them back. I was asking more questions than normal to get conversations started, so something to think about. Also using people's names as well, like where I felt like someone could contribute, calling them out specifically just to introduce them and give them that confidence to start talking. Also look for things like as people start to talk and if someone cuts them off, so you're still kind of doing that, maybe you can go back to them after and just get their opinion. One thing we didn't do, but maybe it's worth considering, we noticed the way we ran most of our sessions, you'd have your brainstorm, you'd come back as a group and talk about all the pieces and then prioritize them. But I was wondering if maybe we could flip that and sort of have the individuals, because there's no physical limitations on the wall and everyone can see everything at once, just have the individuals walk through the cards themselves and prioritize them at the same time, and then maybe play back as a group where the prioritization got to. That might be a way to sort of speed things up, so something worth considering. But one thing that we weren't doing very well was sort of grouping things. So we'd often go to a vote and then a couple of cards would be pretty similar, and if you didn't have the right grouping, then it kind of meant people were voting on a card and there was actually a couple of different groups that were actually the same thing, and it was hard to sort of get back to a total at the end of that. But the voting tools were good, definitely easier actually than sort of what it might be normally. So normally you have your stickers and whatnot, but it's definitely worth checking out. But it is important to add a bit of fun and energy if you can. I guess in our case it was a bit of a sensitive topic, but it was still, you need to kind of have that energy because it is draining in a remote sense. So it is important to cater for different people. So different levels of experience with the concepts. So for us, that kind of meant MVP, lean. We had to do a few examples around that to let people understand sort of where we were thinking, and even sort of how we were thinking about how a product would be built. But you also sort of have the examples around the specific activities you're doing. So with the story mapping example before, you have worked through examples so people can see what's expected of them. I found I was explaining things in multiple ways. So because you don't have that physical element and can draw things or point to things on the board, I'd explain it once and often it wouldn't be clear enough for people. So I was having to go back and try and look at different ways of explaining things. So that's something you'll probably need to do. Also, it's important to offer people different ways of contributing. For us, we ran a co-design activity where typically what you get is people to draw on a piece of paper and then share their insights in terms of how they sort of see the product working. We expected that to be the same remotely, but what actually happened is some people used Post-its. Some people actually went and got screenshots from other websites or applications and brought them back. So you just need to allow for different ways of contributing. And I think part of that was people weren't quite comfortable with the tools as well. So just factor that in. But as we also didn't quite have the same group throughout. So we had about 10 to 12 people. Most workshops would have about 8 to 10. So whilst it was fairly consistent, it wasn't really consistent across all activities. So it's important to have the insights from the previous workshop as part of this workshop, which was actually easier in a remote sense because it's effectively, it just means you take a screenshot and sort of have it ready on the current board so they can get some insight before they sort of kick on to the next activity. There will be problems with us. There was a few activities where I recognised they weren't quite working well enough, and we had to pivot. Timing issues as well. We recognised we were out of time, so we had to speed things up or cut things short. So factor that in. In my head, I had fallbacks for if the tools themselves fell over. It's kind of unlikely, but or if my internet went down when I would do. But so I was looking at Google Docs or things like that, just as a very basic interaction or collaboration, if worse came to worse. People will struggle with the new tools though, so you need to allow a bit of time to help them get up to speed. Internally, we were having, with the internal team, retrospectives at the end of each session. That was handy because it meant that you could look back at what worked well, what didn't, and by the end of the week, you're getting a lot better at running the sessions. But the same applies for user testing that was sort of talked about here. So technology will fall over. People won't be comfortable with the tools. They'll need the tools. Whilst it might be a bit easier to get access to them because they can come in remotely, they still need to be supported. And so you need to have the right tools there to support them. But overall, it was pretty effective, and we actually got some good outcomes out of the user testing. In our case, it was a bit more sensitive because we probably didn't allow for enough support for the people with lived experience, and it's something we'll need to improve sort of going forward. So what was it like for the Black Dog guys? Positive, the feedback was, but tiring. So the first week when we had the 4 days worth of 2 sessions a day, I think people got a lot out of it, but at the same time it was a bit draining. By the end of that, I guess the 4th day, people were shot. Now, it was a bit challenging too because we were trying to change the way of doing things a little bit. So where normally the process would be a bit more drawn out, we're actually trying to condense it into a 2-week activity where normally maybe that was sort of a month or 2 to try and get to the certain outcomes. And I guess as a result, we didn't quite have the same supporting mechanisms for the people that we were working with. So it definitely did sort of challenge the thinking, hopefully in a positive way, and we didn't sort of put too many people off. But it was actually overall pretty positive. I think we had a playback at the end of the discovery. It was quite well attended because I think the Black Dog guys did a good job of creating that wider interest, just showing what could be done in a short space of time, and it was even attended by the CEO. So it was a really good note to finish on. So what was the evaluation? Overall, pretty good. Pretty happy with it, to be honest. Collaboration was good. The quality of deliverables was good. In the end, we kept the same activities we planned to, with maybe just some minor tweaks in terms of how they run on the board. Better-wise, documentation, you don't need to worry so much about it. It's all pretty much documented on the fly. You share the context a bit easier, so the people coming from other sessions, you can have the insights feeding into the next one. The living documents, so even at the end of the workshops, I was going back and using some of the boards continually, so things like the story map or the assumptions mapping, we were constantly coming back to, and even going forward, that can sort of be the case. Also, slightly easier to get people's availability, and the lack of rooms meant that we had a shorter turnaround. I think we only planned for this discovery for 2 weeks out, so you can sort of turn it around a bit quicker, I think. Although worse, I guess it's harder to build rapport. Mentioned that, so the only interaction you have is through the video conferencing, which can be a bit of a challenge. The setup time, it's a bit slower initially, especially once you have to learn the tools, but I think next time it'll be a lot quicker because I have those templates and I can reuse those going forward. The actual sessions themselves need a bit more time as people get used to the tools and get comfortable, so I allow for that. And just the exhaustion level, you can't have long sessions, so keep them short. Key takeaways: plan for that learning curve, both yourself and the people sort of coming to your sessions. You need to be clear with your communication, your audio, use good visual tools if you can. You do need to be a bit more organised up front, so have that plan in. Hopefully you're one of those organised people that likes to get things done early. Be flexible to achieve your outcomes, so if things aren't working, be prepared to pivot or change if you need to. You have to be a bit more attentive to detail, so the facilitation point of view, looking at people's faces, looking at their cursors, that sort of thing. But be creative and try things. This is a fairly new space, and I think there's a lot of cool tools that you could probably use with a bit of research. So for me, I probably would recommend using a remote discovery. It'll be interesting to see, I guess, what happens when lockdown is lifted, I guess, which is starting to happen now. I guess, but the tools are established. Once I got past that initial hurdle, there's not really anything stopping you. And even since then, actually, I've found that I'm using these tools a lot in my meetings since, and I think it's definitely something to make part of your toolkit. So that's it. So maybe we'll go on to some questions if you have any. So this is dius.tech/Slack, and I'll hang around and answer your questions. So thank you. I hope you got something out of it.